So let's see how good I do. Ask. I do know that Mark was born and raised in a Methodist household in Illinois.
Yeah.
I know that his grandparents were missionaries,
Yeah.
and he comes from a strong faith background. I know that he has been a student of all kinds of studies for many, many years. I don't want to say how many, but of a lot of Eastern studies, and he is certainly a wealth of knowledge in that respect. I know that he was the county executive here and then retired a few years ago from a position as the, I don't know what the title was, Director of Western
Western District Director, yeah.
Okay.
New York State Parks.
Of New York State Parks. Let's see what else I know.
Doing pretty good.
Okay. I know that he was a founding member, along with Reverend Elaine, of this fellowships, as we said, 37 years ago. And he continues in his role of some kind of foundational pastor. I knew it. It was close. Mark's a wonderful teacher and mentor to so many people. I often tease him and say if he had a course that said how to read the phone book, I would be the first person to sign up. And you know that's true. So let's see. That's about it, I guess. I'm Mike. I'm going to call you Mike now. So, okay.
It's all right.
So my pleasure, and I'm sorry to introduce Mark Thomas.
Thank you, Christy. That's a pretty good job. She had that. She had it turned upside down. But you didn't know she had that upside down the whole time, so she putted pretty good. Oh, it's a pleasure to be with you this evening. Thank you all for coming out tonight. And Jane, that song you sometimes sing at Vespers, "The Spirit of the Lord is in this place." Mm-hmm. Do that.
On the spot.
On the spot.
Wow.
Or even just say it if you can't sing it.
Well, I could probably sing it, but I don't know if you want me to. There's a sweet, sweet spirit in this place, and I know it's the Spirit of the Lord. There's a sweet expression on each face, and I know it's the Spirit of the Lord. Sweet Holy Spirit, that sweet heavenly dove, stay right here with us, filling us with your love. And for each blessing, we lift our hearts in praise. For without a doubt, we know that we will be revived when we shall leave this place.
So be it. Thank you. You did great. Yeah.
I know, sorry about that.
She got through it, though. That's good. Given that cold you had last week, you did really good.
I know, right?
Yeah, you did.
Up again, though.
Yeah, oh, well.
Probably a good thing.
Clear it out. Clear it out.
That's right.
That's great. So this is the opening week of our 4-week series on hospitality. And that means we're going to be doing Vespers through the end of this month, and then we take a break for the winter, and we start again in April. But this will be our wrap-up to the season of Vespers this year, this theme. And people, why hospitality? Well, it's one of the things that is from ancient traditions, one of the most important things for us to get right. And it's also one of the things, like compassion, in our culture, in our world today, which we don't do a terribly good job of, collectively. So, in preparing for this week, for this talk, I was very touched by a story I came upon, an interview of someone interviewing Bob Costas, who was usually doing interviewing of other people. And he was telling this story about an experience that both Hank Aaron And Willie Mays had told him that happened in the 1950s. And the story was about a St. Louis baseball player named Stan Musial, who was one of the greatest players to ever play the baseball game. And in the 50s, in the All-Star game, the clubhouse where the National League players were, there was a table with black players that were there playing cards because they weren't included by the whites in their conversation and whatever. They were kind of off by themselves. And they included Willie Mays, Hank Aaron, Ernie Banks, and Frank Robinson, all who went on to be Hall of Fame players in the baseball world. And Stan Musial walked up to that table and said, "Deal me in." Didn't ask, said, "Deal me in." Of course they did. He sat down playing. And Bob Costa said that one of the most special parts of that story was that both Hank Aaron and Willie Mays told him separately about it. And they both told the same story. And they both told him that, that meant a lot to us as black players, but they said that wasn't really mattered to us. What really mattered was what he was saying by his actions to the white players. Deal me in. We exclude people when we don't know them well. We exclude people in little ways. And we don't really mean to sometimes, but sometimes we do. And either way, the downside is people get hurt by that. There's a passage in the gospel in the Gospel of Mark, 12th chapter, 28th verse, where Jesus is being tested by one of the wise guys, one of the Jewish hierarchy, the intelligentsia, let's call him that. And he asked Jesus, he says, "So what's the highest commandment?" And Jesus said, "Well, of course, it's love the Lord your God. Hear, O Israel, love the Lord your God was one Lord, and you shall love that Lord with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, with all your might, and all your mind." And then he adds one more line that's not in. And that prayer, by the way, that statement is called, in the Jewish world, it's called the Shema. And it's on their doorposts, in the mezuzahs that they put on their doorposts. It's a prayer they're to say every day. It's to teach their children, and it's to be about how they live their lives. And so it was the highest commandment. But Jesus added one more. Love your neighbor as yourself. That's not in the Shema. That's not in that prayer. And it took the guy back a bit, right? But in another verse in one of the other Gospels, he says, that second part is like unto the first. Love your neighbor as yourself. Now, why would he do that? That's a good question, because one of the key things about that ancient time he was living in was there was a lack of hospitality, of love being extended beyond their own boundaries. They were 500 years under occupation. They really hated the Romans. They really hated other civilizations from Babylonia and Persia that had taken them over at various times and had wreaked some havoc on them. They really had a lot of hatred towards groups, and they had missed that you can love God all you want, but if you're not loving your neighbor too, you're missing a big part of the story of life. And so he was calling them out on something that, even though it's ancient, we're still struggling with this as a people, as humanity. We still have a long way to go in this regard. It's easy to extend hospitality to people we know and we love, that are easy to hang with, easy to spend time with, they like us in certain ways and we like them, and that can be an easy way, and there's a comfort zone there that we can sit in and be comfortable in. And it's easy to extend hospitality where there's familiarity as well. It's easy to extend hospitality in those environments, but where there's unknowns or there's unlikes, not dislikes, but unlikes. Unlikes can become dislikes, but unlikes. When we have a degree of privilege, and yet we don't extend that privilege to others, when we don't allow ourselves to be of concern for the well-being of everyone, and not just a select few, we have missed the message of the second half of that commandment. You know, one of the great things is we, in the message of Christ, the message of Buddha, most traditions is that the supreme source of all life, whatever you want to call that, whatever name you have for it, is love. And that's grace, because it's nothing you do that earns that. It's your birthright. It is yours. It is all of life's. And the challenge that we get into is when we don't extend that grace to other people. We can be really good at not extending it. You know, we've already gone through the Canadian Thanksgiving, and we're approaching the American Thanksgiving. And so we're in the season of harvest, we're in the season of plenty. And we live in a world of plenty, and yet we spend so much of our time hanging out in scarcity thinking, scarcity emoting, and there is so much for so many if we just put the resources out hospitably versus stingily around the world. One of the great things that is going on right here in our local community is the Presbyterian Church in Fredonia has been doing a food pantry, and they are massively expanding that to reach more and more families. And people think, well, why in Fredonia? That's a pretty well-off community here in Chautauqua County. Well, guess what? There's just as much need in that community as there is in this community and Dunkirk and Jamestown and everywhere else. The need is great. And the more food they're able to obtain, the more food is going out because the need is here in our midst. Hospitality. Feeding people. It's very important. Love your neighbor as yourself. I think this is one of the most important but least understood lines in this whole passage. And that is it's not loving others like you'd like to be treated by them. It's loving them because they are you. Love your neighbor as yourself. It's not a transaction. It's a statement of fact. Love others because they are you. We all are in this together. Their child, your child is my child. My child is your child. My grandchildren are your grandchildren. My nieces and nephews are your nieces and nephews. What happens to you in your heart happens to me in my heart. We're all in this together, and yet we think we're all separated out. We're not. Our indigenous neighbors on the reservation over here, the Seneca people, have a prayer. It's really more of an address than a prayer. I'd like to share it with you this evening. It's, today we have gathered, and when we look upon the faces around us, we see the cycles of life continue. We have been given the duty to live in balance and harmony with each other and all living things. So now let us bring our minds together as one as we give greetings and thanks to each other as people. Now we are one. And they go through that address, that prayer, if you will, that statement, goes on for about an hour. And it lists everything from the earth all the way up through to the heavens, and about different relationships. And it's a prayer, it's a statement that they do on a regular basis because it's about gratitude. And it's about hospitality. It's about inclusion of all life. And as the Seneca people will say, all my relations, and they mean everything of the earth we are related to. Take out part of that puzzle and the whole system can collapse. The earth can do without us, but it can't deal without a whole lot of other life forms that are far more critical than we are. Yet we think we're the top dog. We think we're the be-all, end-all. We're the answer to everything. And yet, everything that was about us was connected to everything else in life. You know, we're called to give with an open hand versus a closed fist. We're called to step into each other's space with love, with harmony, with graciousness. And that doesn't seem to be such a difficult thing when you ask it. But underneath the surface, we don't do well enough with that. I'm very concerned about the election this week, as you are. Canadian or American, don't matter. We're all in this together. The you is you, as you said. You is us, we is you. And, you know, when the election's all done, all said and done, we've become such an inhospitable country in a world that needs us to do a lot better. And I ask that all of you pray this week that past the election, we get past all of the differences and we start looking more at where you and I are one. And we got to do a lot better job of communicating that and including others in this mix. It's not about excluding. There's those that would like to divide us. But what we need to do is come together. And we need to come together in a big way. And the election is just one day. But after that, we have a lot of healing to do in this country and for this world. And there's a whole lot of people north of the border like yourself, but in other areas of the world that I've spoken to over the last few weeks that are very concerned about not just the election, but where are you as a people in America today? Where's your heart? They see us as having a problem of the heart, not of the mind. Politics is a struggle of mind mostly. Spirituality is a struggle of heart. We have a job to do, and that's put a country back together. So pray for the good to happen on all levels. Whatever happens on election day is important. Not to say it isn't, but what I see and what I feel about where we are as a people, we need to be far more hospitable to those of us who have differences of life than just our similarities. So I pray that we'll all come together, that we'll learn from an experience of division that it's not worth it. What's worth it is that when we actually own the fact that we're all in this together, and we make that happen in our hearts so that our minds can come along and we can truly, truly be there with and for each other because we are one. Thanks. Have a good evening.